Good morning. Thank you very much for joining me and Frank Busch at Insights Inc. I'm Jessica Dumas, and Frank Busch is my guest today. And I've asked him to come back a second time because he's across the country in BC, and I'm in Winnipeg. And I think it's a really nice opportunity for us to get to know each other, to share about some of our experiences and to just learn what's going on in different areas of Canada. So I'm excited to have you back with me. Frank, how are you?
I'm very good. Good to see you again, Jessica.
Yeah, good to see you too. And I also wanted to really say thank you so much because I know that you're a very busy person, and spending this time on this webinar, which I do, once a week and sometimes a little bit extra, I'm really passionate about it, and it's something that I just kind of do on my free time. And so I really wanted to say thank you for putting some time in your calendar to share this with me, because I know that you're busy and you're all over the place.
Oh, you're very welcome. And, I think this sort of information sharing is very important for our people because, we all are pretty busy. Those of us who are really trying to help improve the quality of life for First Nations across Canada, we end up wearing a lot of hats, and we don't always have a lot of time to keep up with what's going on or what the latest is, because we're just so buried in trying to fix all the problems that we're dealing with. So I think this is great that you invite people who are doing it to come and share their knowledge and experience. And I know now when I'm going to conferences and that, people recognize me like, oh, hey, you were talking with Jessica Dumas, right? They feel more comfortable to approach and ask questions. That's it's very helpful kickstart some new work relationships, and that. So I really appreciate it.
Excellent. I was able to hear what you were saying, but I feel like it's a little bit choppy. Are you getting my feed okay? Okay, maybe it'll take a couple seconds to come back, but I'm still here waiting for your internet to catch up with me. I don't know if it's me or you.
Okay, yeah, no, it's getting a little early too there, so yeah.
Okay, hopefully we'll be able to kind of get rid of that. Oh, now I'm hearing static. One of the challenges, right? So we'll try and continue, and if we need to restart on a new link, then
yeah.
But that is, I'm really pleased to hear that. Oh, it says Frank Busch has left.
Okay, now.
I wonder if I'm going to leave the room for a sec and try and come back, and let me see if that
Okay, I'm getting you now.
Okay, I think we're back. Great. You got me?
Okay, let's do that.
Are we there?
I'm here, yeah. Sorry, I just seemed to have you frozen there for a bit. I don't know if it's you or me, but yeah, one of the challenges of talking to people across the country.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So I appreciate that people have been able to recognize you. And I was looking at our video from our first interview, and there's been 102 views, which is super cool. Yeah. And I've been, out at different events, and people will recognize me too because of someone that they know in their network that I've had, kind of chatting with me on the webinar, which is just really nice to know that the community is recognizing and also valuing why we both agree that we want to do this, right? It's just to share that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So tell me about you, Frank. So I know about what you do, a little bit of what you do, and some of your career path. But you have a new baby in your family, right? Tell me about your family.
Yeah, so we have three boys. The youngest is named Gabriel, and he was born here in BC. I had two boys born in BC, and my first was in Winnipeg. So we've been out here for about 5 years now from Winnipeg. So it's been pretty interesting kind of development, and I am on the road a lot. So we do a lot of kind of, Skyping and that, to keep connected and whatnot with the boys. But I'm usually only gone during the week. Normally I will be at home on the weekends and that, and we try to spend a lot of time, as a family and that. It's definitely a work-life balance challenge at all times because, you're just constantly pulled in 100 different directions. And I know a lot of people feel that when they travel, you have to try and find ways to mitigate those challenges. So.
Yeah, for sure. And so how old are the boys? We keep coming in and out, don't we?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah. So
how old are your boys?
Alexander is 4 and Gabriel is 7 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you've got just a little one at home.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he's a lot of fun. So he's very happy, smiley baby and that. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Great to know that they're healthy.
Yeah.
So I was asking you about the 200 First Nations that you've visited in Canada, and you corrected me and said it's now over 250. So
yeah.
How long have you been, when did you start counting the communities that you went to?
I think in Manitoba, because when I was living in Winnipeg, I was traveling to a lot of communities, and somebody had asked, have you been to every First Nation in Manitoba? And I said, no, I don't think so. There's quite a few I haven't been to. So I actually looked at the list and was checked off the ones that I'd been to, and I think I was missing all but 6, or I went and actually downloaded the entire list of the 634 First Nations and checked off the ones that I'd been to, and it was way up there. It was like 150, 160. Wow. So now just once in a while, I have basically an Excel spreadsheet with a list of all the First Nations in Canada, and just every couple of months I go through and highlight the ones that I visited recently and do a little sort by color and that. And yeah, it's just a neighborhood of 250 now.
Wow, that's so cool. And that's just kind of your own private little list that you're making. That's not a work requirement. It's just what you started doing.
Yeah, no, it's it's interesting too, because a lot of the First Nations, I've probably spoken to quite a few more than that, but a lot of them want to meet you in the city. So if they're from, within a couple hours driving distance of a center, and they know you're coming from BC, they'll meet you in Winnipeg or Regina or Toronto or wherever. And I'm always trying to tell them no, I'll come to you. I'd like to visit your community. I'd like to look around, see what kind of economic activity is going on, what work has to be done, and that. So it's pretty interesting. But I do get quite a few where I just go to Edmonton and meet with 6 chief and councils in a couple of days. Right? In usually like a hotel conference room or something. Yeah.
Cool. That's pretty cool. That's a lot of traveling. I remember the last time we talked, you said that. Just opening up another page over here. You said that. We're always driving, right? Indigenous people are always driving.
Yeah, no, and I wrote a novel while I was driving. So because we did so much, I used to go up to Cross Lake, Manitoba, every once a month or so, and it's about a 7-hour drive from Winnipeg. And you start listening to music, and then you start listening to audiobooks, and then you kind of just get bored of everything. So one day I just picked up my BlackBerry and hit the voice record and started telling a story. The idea would be to tell my boys stories when I got home. And I kind of ballooned into my novel Gray Eyes, and ended up getting published and whatnot. But basically, just wherever I was driving, I would dictate the story just for something to do on the road when you're alone, and turn into a novel and won an award. So people always say well, you're an econ developer, you're a finance guy, accountant, how to work a fiction. And I just said, well, I'm on the road a lot.
Good for you. You know what? I never really thought about that because I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm always driving and listening to audiobooks and sometimes, yeah, I agree. It can get a little, you just want something fresh, right? So
yeah,
cool. And then just to let it flow.
Yeah. Now I actually take courses. online driving. So I did a Canadian Securities course because they have it available on audio. So if I have a long drive or something like that, that I tell people to be careful with because some of the material can be really boring, and you know you get a little drowsy at the wheel. You don't want that. So you want something that's going to be interesting and fresh, right? So and that's why I stopped listening to music while I drive, because you know after a while you've heard every song in the world 1,000 times, and you know you get that highway hypnosis, right? So that's why I switched to audio, and I avoid fiction. I wouldn't listen to like an audio version of you know George Martin or something, because it gets really suspenseful and you start slowing down and it gets really exciting and you're doing 140, and you know so I stick to nonfiction on the road.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Thank goodness for this technology. I mean, it really is cool. It's really helped connect and then help people learning, right?
Yeah, and it's just a really good use of time, I find. So you know, it's just because you would otherwise be doing nothing, and I get a little antsy if I'm not able to do something, or if you know I'm kind of limited. And travel is a big you know deal that way. It's you know sometimes if I have to go across the country into the Maritimes or up to the Arctic Circle, it can take a full day just to get there. And if it's during the work week, you feel like, wow, I've lost a day, you know, of getting things done because I'm just getting myself to the place I needed to be. So if I can do some writing or do some reading or listen to audio or something like that, it feels like I haven't wasted that day.
Yeah. What about TED Talks? Do you listen to TED Talks?
Yes, I do when I can. Sometimes the Wi-Fi can be a little sketchy in the places I go to, so it's usually only if I'm in a city or you know a conference or something like that. And a lot of my friends do TED Talks. You know, Monique Ray Smith did a really great one, and my buddy Rob Castellan did a really good one a couple of years ago. And so it's funny when you start seeing the people. You know, I believe you did a TED Talk too, didn't you?
I didn't. I did something similar, but I may be doing one in the future.
You did that really good 5-minute one. I saw that a while back, and it was really good because it was all this like concise information in 5 minutes that anybody could understand. I was like, okay, she needs to do a TED Talk.
Yeah, thank you for watching it. So it was a organization called Disrupt HR, or I guess a network organization, and they have these events all across Canada, and that's the challenge. That here's 5 minutes. I think the majority of the conversations go, oh, do you have an idea that HR that would really, you know, shake things up? But of course, when they come to Indigenous people, they say, we want you to talk about this, right? And so they wanted me to talk about Indigenous inclusion, which I thought, well, okay, I can do that. And the challenge is 5 minutes, you don't do an introduction, no call out to your business kind of thing. So, okay, that's, you know, a decent rule. And the other challenge is you need, is it 20 slides that are going to slide every 15 seconds that will complement your point or whatever it is that you're making. So it was an interesting process going through, because I had to figure out, first of all, there's so much to say, right? What do I want to say? If I had everyone's ear for 5 minutes, what am I going to say? And it was such a rush. It really was, because once I was on the stage, I literally felt like I was floating, you know, watching the images come up and saying, okay, I have to move on. And there were one or two things that I also wanted to squeeze in there, but no one knows that I, you know, didn't say it the way I wrote it, sort of thing. But it was a pretty cool experience. And you know what? They go all across Canada. And what about your opportunity for TED Talk? Have you ever thought about that?
I have, but I guess I just do too many different things. Whereas I find like if you're going to do the TED Talk circuit, you really need to be focused on a particular brand. Yeah. And I guess I'm a lot more general. I just at times it seems very random. I just try to help the people who I believe are kind of sent to me or put in my path or whatever it might be, and just with whatever knowledge I've had. I do think I have a pretty wide range of experience, but it was really just from hopping from job to job. Like it wasn't something I meant or set out to do. It's just like, oh, you've done a lot of different things. I was like, yeah, it's not my fault. You know, it's kind of what I thought when people say that, right? So, yeah. So I do come across a lot of people, and I do try to help in different ways. I recently launched a website called Indigenous-arts.ca. And basically what I'm doing there is using my marketing knowledge and experience to help Indigenous artists to promote their artwork. Because a lot of times they get opportunities, but they really only get exposure. So what we did is I started taking First Nations, Inuit Métis paintings and putting them on T-shirts and mugs and yoga pants and things like that, so that they can actually earn a royalty for the images they own. And it's really to counter cultural appropriation, because we have Indigenous designs and traditional designs and that end up, being mass produced by corporations and that, and where royalties aren't being paid to the original artists or to the people who own that artwork. Whereas anywhere else in the world, it seems, besides in the Indigenous community, copyrights are known and enforced, right? But as soon as you call it Indigenous arts, all of a sudden, it's kind of open source, kind of, freeware. And I said, no. Whoever the artist is or whoever owns that art would do it. I wouldn't just take a star blanket design and then make a star blanket look exactly like that. I want to know whose design that was. Even though it's a particular tradition, even though the styles are fairly similar, each pattern is unique to each artist, right? So.
Wow, I am so happy you brought that up. That is so amazing. I love it. So in the midst of all of this stuff you're doing, you started a business, an online business.
Yeah.
So you know what? I've seen you posting a lot of that stuff for a couple of weeks. Beautiful, amazing stuff. And the website is so simple and easy to, access. And I was going to ask you if you owned it, and then I totally forgot about it. So thanks for bringing that up.
No, you're welcome.
Exciting. So how do artists, like the artists that are on there, do you know them personally, or how did you get started?
I know right now I have 3 artists. 2 I know personally, and 1 contacted me via social media. So he contacted me, and then basically what I tell them is what my requirements are. Basically, the suppliers who make the products need files in a particular format. So I do a little bit of that work, but what I really need from the artists is to have their art digitally scanned in some medium, so that I can take it and convert it, or send it to a graphic designer to have converted and adjusted to meet the specifications set by the manufacturers and that. So it's really kind of more of a break-even enterprise, because the margins are pretty narrow, and I pay a really high royalty to the artist. So the idea is that as long as because it's basically split almost in half. Where the artist gets about a 40% royalty, and then the 60% I use for maintaining the site and for advertising. So, so I'm actually planning on having some posters designed to be sent out to the band offices in Canada, and that to help promote the art as well. So it's just kind of that idea of like the lateral kindness, like taking what knowledge you have and using it to help, other Indigenous people on their path. And artists are generally not business people. They're artists, right? So they're not thinking about like, how much can I get for this, or do I own this copyright, or and I'm trying to help spread that message a little bit to artists. I was actually the treasurer of the graffiti art program of Winnipeg, and that's kind of where I learned a lot about those issues, because we had homeless street artists in Winnipeg. Who are having their designs copied, like you're talking about a person with really nothing. And then other people were copying their art because they, either felt that they were entitled to do so or something, or that person couldn't come after them. So we were really big into teaching artists their rights and giving them different medium for earning income through their artwork.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I love it. I'm so happy to hear that. So it makes me think about authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because so my involvement with Aboriginal Chamber of Commerce for the past, 4 or 5 years, I've always had this vision that, maybe the chamber could take a lead. And of course, our resources have always been challenged, but the opportunity for businesses to really show their authenticity as an Indigenous business, because, and you've probably seen this many times, just, maybe similar to the story that you just said about people taking art from homeless people, but using or utilizing maybe the Indigenous community and almost claiming that you're an Aboriginal business, and maybe you're serving Aboriginal clients, but you're not really an Aboriginal business. So authenticity is really important to be clear on and be aware on it. And I'm not really sure who's doing that for business and for art, because you go into gas stations, many places across North America, and you see a dream catcher and it's got like a funny little sticker on it, and you just kind of laugh because it's not an authentic dream catcher, right? So what do you think about that? And how does that fit in your indigenousarts.ca?
Well, I had a very similar experience to what you're talking about. I think I was at the airport in Calgary, and they have one of these heritage trading post type places. And so, yeah, same thing. I walked up. There's this little dream catcher, drum, or something like that. You flip it over, made in China. I'm kind of like, haha, this is lame, right?
Yeah.
And then the clerk says, "Oh, you like that? We sell so many of those." And I was like, what? And so kind of thinking about doing research, like to have those mass produced in China, they would have had to produce at least 10,000 units, like minimum, if not 100,000 or a million. And then you see them everywhere, non-native people and people who don't understand the culture and that just buy them up, and monies that would have otherwise gone to an indigenous artist or crafter. So that's kind of what made me say, like, okay, I gotta do this. I gotta help out a little bit, just so that people are kind of more aware of the fact that we need to have authentic, also for art money to support themselves. We should, our ancestors, we ever would have had starving artists within, amongst the really top kind of people in the community. They would have been just in the same way that tradespeople are paid, or architects, and very high level professionals, because you're talking about very fine skills. Like when I see some of my painter friends working and doing their painting and that, I mean, they have such exact motor skills that take a lifetime to develop. I can barely like write my own name properly, and these guys can like paint just perfect images of animals and whatnot, and they're not being paid accordingly. So even Louis Riel, he was really big into the arts, and he said it was the artists that would give us our spirits back, right? So I'm trying to help make that happen as well by giving artists more opportunities to be able to showcase their wares, and to not have to have value to their art now rather than posthumously. So as soon as an artist dies, all of a sudden their work is worth so much, and I find that's just wrong. So
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy to know more about that. That is so cool. I'm gonna help share that info too. That's super cool.
sure, yeah.
So tell me, what is a day in the life of Frank like?
Uh, Normally it's pretty average. I mean, usually I'm traveling somewhere, so usually a regular day is kind of where I travel to a community. That can get kind of crazy because Google Maps doesn't really know the res very well. So I just kind of usually have to be pointed in the right direction, and then try to, yeah. So I get a lot of lip pointing, and then you pull up to the side of a gravel road, and sometimes you got to give a guy a ride in order to get directions on the res. So I'm just used to that. I'm pretty comfortable with that, and I get in there and asking for logistics. If I set a meeting at a band office, I said, okay, I'm coming in on such and such a highway. How do I actually find the band office? And often there's a lot of strange directions, like, oh, you'll find this red house and you need to turn there, and then there's a fire hydrant in the middle of a field, and then you go, So that happens a little bit, but that's usually what's going on. But there are some other days, at least once or twice a week. I'm usually in front of a crowd, either at a member meeting or at a conference or workshop, and I'm speaking to large groups of people on, usually on finance or on writing or business or something, just trying to share the knowledge, right? I think what's happened a little bit in the Indigenous community is that we've developed a kind of mindset of scarcity, where we believe that whatever we're doing, we have to keep very secret. We can't share our knowledge with people because they'll start doing it and take all the business away from us or something like that, right? I don't believe that. I believe the more people doing it, the more demand will appear for those services and that. And I try to promote it that way. So, somebody says, oh, I wish I was doing what you're doing. And I say, well, why don't you? Here's what I did. You can do exactly it and, put your own spin on it or do whatever you want, right? And then people are always shocked by that. They're like, well, aren't you worried you're going to lose money? I said, no, because if people see more of it, they'll buy more of it. And whatever you sell will lead people to buy my products or services as well, right? So, we kind of create our own industry.
Yeah, I totally believe that as well, especially with the training that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the blanket exercise from Kairos?
I've heard a little bit about it. I'd love to learn more if there's an opportunity.
It's a really popular activity in Winnipeg. And so Kairos is a group of churches that I'm not sure how long they've been together, but about 10 years ago, this group got together and they wanted to create an activity that would help teach people about the history of settlers arriving to Canada and what that 500-year timeline has been. And so Kairos is a national organization, and this activity has been like in really high demand in Manitoba. And so I have a license with them, so I can train other trainers and for them to do in their organizations or whatever. And then I use it in my business as part of a workshop that I do. And it's, you know, people are wanting to do more of that, and there's opportunity for that. And sometimes I feel people kind of challenged, you know, that they are not, they want to be doing it and they're not, you know, sort of asking in a partnership way, but they're kind of, you know, why are you doing that? And I'm like, there's more than enough for us to all do this, right? And I'll share my material, like this is how I do it. And it's amazing education opportunities, and there's no shortage of opportunities. I don't believe that.
Oh yeah, no, and that's really great, and I think that's going to be the key to our future is more kind of collaboration, more working together, more promoting kind of what we have to offer, you know, and moving away from kind of secrecy. I've worked with a lot of people, you know, in different avenues, not just business, but also in our ceremonial life, where they really want to strictly limit who's doing what and how they're doing it. It almost becomes like a cultural police or something. And I think that's really wrong, because it's just really limiting, right? Where we create this, yeah, I think in our traditional communities, jobs were done by people who could do them. So it didn't matter if you hadn't done it before. It didn't matter if there was somebody, you know, better somewhere else who could do it. You use what you had at the time to the best of your ability. And I think, you know, something we've really lost is that the mentorship, where you would actually, you know, tell someone like, hey, I like what you're doing. I want to help you. I want to learn how to do it. And then having the opportunity where, you know, I think our responsibility as a mentor is to eventually say, okay, you've learned all you can learn from me. It's time for you to go out there and do it, and also learn other things, and maybe come back and teach me something, you know. And I've been kind of blessed that way, where I've had mentors kind of do that. Like, oh, I think this is much I can teach you on this, and go learn other things and bring it back to me. And I'm kind of getting into that stage now, where people who I had previously helped and mentored, and they went out there and did a lot of research, they're now coming back and teaching me things that I didn't know or didn't have the time to learn. So, and it's a really great kind of way of networking that way, you know, where we become kind of more partners, or kind of, you know, mentor each other, you know, and I think that's something that's been lost in our community, and we need to bring it back.
Absolutely. So I know that you, or I think that most of your business is with First Nation governments, right?
Yeah.
You must come in contact with a lot of businesses as well across your time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask if you're seeing a trend at all with businesses hiring an Aboriginal liaison or an Indigenous, you know, whatever that role is. Are you seeing that?
Yes, I'm seeing a little bit of it. I don't believe I'm seeing enough of it, and I don't see it being done in the right way. So a lot of times what they will do is a company will be advised, usually by a lawyer or something, that they need more Indigenous inclusion, or they need somebody to handle the Indigenous issues. So a lot of times they'll hire what they would call an Aboriginal relationship manager, or like an Aboriginal relations liaison or something like that. What they don't realize is when that person comes to the First Nation, what we're hearing is Indian agent, you know? So it's become like a corporate Indian agent, where you're the person assigned to deal with the Indians, keep them quiet while we do our thing, right? It's not truly a partnership arrangement. Now, more and more of those people are finally Aboriginal, and I think a lot of them were being non-Native people that were being hired out of government sources, you know, people who had climbed as high as they could climb in the government ladders and then wanted to go private sector or become a consultant. And I could only imagine being a fly on the wall in some of these interviews where they're at some predominantly European company, interviewing a European person or who says, oh yeah, I've been working with First Nations, Métis Inuit for however many years, and I know how to talk to these people, right? So, and it seems a lot of that happens. So more and more now, the companies are realizing, oh, we need Indigenous people. Yes, you need an Indigenous liaison person, but you need to also start hiring Indigenous people at the grassroots. You have to become an Indigenous organization at some level. Just in reflecting the Canadian population, and that's not quite happening as quickly as I like it. There are some companies who are doing it very well. Potash Corp of Saskatchewan is definitely one of them. They've implemented a youth training program. So in addition to hiring Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations, Métis Inuit staff, they're also having those staff reach out to youth and training them in the trades and others to allow opportunities. And they also have some very good scholarship programs. So they're also helping, Indigenous people, to achieve goals even outside of the company. So that's really, those types of programming are really a good way to show that you're invested in the Indigenous community, not just from a corporate perspective, but just as, a steward to the community. And some of them are starting to catch up on that, but not quite as quickly as they could. Again, a lot of times I think what happens is people just don't know where to start. And I think they really need to reach out. And if you're going to start hiring or creating Indigenous procurement, you really need, your staff trained. Because while upper management can have all the best of intentions, if they hire, staff at the grassroots level and their own staff, their existing staff, may not be comfortable with it, and that's always a challenge. And I think a lot of companies need to be aware that it's okay to ask. It says, well, what if we hire an Indigenous person and there's some incident of racism or that person is offended by something, and I think that holds a lot of employers back from hiring Indigenous people. And to that, I say, well, get some help, hire a consultant, start having the conversations, just get comfortable talking with it. Because it's, that sort of thing may happen, but probably not as often as they're worried about it. And maybe just have an idea of what would be the process, if something like that did happen, what would be the answer to it. And I don't think it's quite as hard. On our own side, I think there's another issue is that I don't think enough Indigenous people are actually reaching out to the private sector for employment. I think a lot of them, the preference is to work in government or to work in a nonprofit capacity and not get out there into the business world. But I think if you look at all of our, great role models, for me, a real big one has been Senator Murray Sinclair. Senator Murray Sinclair didn't go into the Aboriginal judiciary. He went into the Canadian judiciary. He was named to the Court of Queen's Bench. And this is why I think people really respect him, because he overcomes challenges and obstacles. He actually tells a story about the first time he went to court just out of law school and introduced himself to the judge, and the judge thought he was the accused in the case, not the lawyer. Right. So I was quiet, but and then it said, okay, I have a lot of work to do here, and. But it's the people who have broken down those barriers for us, I think, that are appreciated. And whatever industry it's in, whatever level of the economy it happens to be in, we do need our people at the grassroots level to just start getting in there. I found that in my life, I've been in situations where I've worked in, non-Indigenous corporations, and you're really there to change people's minds, because a lot of people, maybe who have stereotypes or prejudices against Indigenous people, most of them don't actually know any Indigenous people. It's just things they've heard from relatives or friends or family or whatever it might be. And I always get this, with my non-Native friends and that, they'll always say, you're not like other Indigenous people. And then I always say, well, how many do you know? Because I'm exactly like all my friends, my peer group, other Indigenous professionals that I know. But they kind of start to realize it, like, oh wow, no, I've only met this one, and he's not so bad usually, so.
No, it's interesting because I'm often invited and maybe you get this too, but I'm often invited to be on a board of directors, right? And
Yes.
sometimes it comes in waves, like 5 emails in a week, and it's like, no, I'm sorry. I'd love to contribute, but I can't continue to do that, right? And one of the I shared with someone last week in my network that it's been kind of frustrating for me as an entrepreneur and really being passionate about wanting to create my own income, create my own business, do what I want to do, enjoy my life that way and that sort of thing. And it's a lot of work to get there, even in believing that you can do that. But then, so being an entrepreneur, then being invited to, as an Indigenous woman, so they sometimes have asked me, we want an Indigenous perspective, and we love a female perspective. So obviously, right, female women, they want me for my specific knowledge and who I am specifically. So I'm sitting around the table, and this has happened for years. And so I'm an entrepreneur. Many people around the table are often CEOs or directors, and they're getting paid an annual salary. We're talking about Indigenous inclusion or Indigenous employment, and I'm the only one sitting at the table not making money at that point. And that is freaking frustrating. And so I feel like I'm kind of, I've reached the point where I've created a network. I've, really set myself up so that I've even taught myself, what I know, sort of thing. And so it's an interesting time, I think, and it'll be interesting to see, where some of these networks go and where I'll go with my experience.
Yeah. And, as Indigenous people, we need to start haggling more. I mean, we do it really well at powwows and that. So it's funny because that's probably the one area I won't haggle is when I talk to a crafter or artist. I'll just say, how much do you need for this, whatever it is, and then just give them what they ask for. But I remember hearing stories growing up about some of my uncles and my I guess kind of grandfathers who were really good at haggling with the Hudson's Bay Company. So they'd actually take their furs to the trading posts and get better deals than other relatives. And it got to the point where certain people would be given other people's furs to trade because they knew they'd get a better price if it was that person, Yeah. And those were the heroes of our community, right? Somebody who had those skills. But just somewhere, I think really just in the 70s or 80s at the decline of the fur trade, our people started losing those skills or started feeling like we're not supposed to ask for what something's worth if it's a non-Indigenous person, which I think is kind of ridiculous. And the people who have really done well for us in negotiation and land claims, and who aren't afraid to say, well, no, this is what it's worth, this is what we expect, and to help and develop those skills. So and something you learn in business is that you can get the deal by offering a lower price, but you will pay for that. All of a sudden you're realizing you're getting less than you're worth. And you kind of start to hate what you're doing because you're doing it so cheaply. Whereas if you would have said like, look, this is my price or I'm not doing it. And then you get that price and you're pretty happy. And then, it just really, obviously everything else in life kind of, follows through that. So I always tell people like, no, find out what it's worth. I'm always directing people to payscale.com because they're always wondering like, am I getting paid what I should be getting paid at my job? And I said, well, go to payscale.com and find out. So the other thing is that we seem to discount ourselves. So we say somewhere in the back of our minds, we say, oh, but I'm Indigenous, so I should make 10% or 15% less than the non-Indigenous person. I disagree. I say we're 4% of the population. There should be a premium, especially companies. You want to hire a real Indigenous person, here I am, but it's going to cost you more than it would cost to hire a non-native, Aboriginal liaison or something like that, right? So don't be afraid to ask. I mean, if they say no, then fine, go somewhere else, right? It's adopting that mentality of abundance, right? Where we stop seeing it as a limited number of jobs and start seeing it as a unlimited number of jobs and opportunities. And once you put your mindset there, and I thank Calvin Helene for that, really, reading a lot of his books, Dance of Dependency, the empowerment mindset, really helped, get that message home. That we do live in a world of abundance, and we've got to stop limiting ourselves through our mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's great, and that's really helpful. There's yeah, so I did a training session yesterday, and we had a really interesting conversation. It was a group of entrepreneurs, no, engineers, and so they invited me in to do a 1 day session, and it was really cool. We did the blanket exercise in the morning, and then in the afternoon we really dive into a specific timeline of treaty, just some dates, some of what the intent is. We talk about residential schools, and the Indian Act, and people are often shocked and that sort of thing. But their group was, I don't know, I was really, I think, just amused by overhearing some of their conversations, which I won't really get into, but just engineers. It's a whole industry that I feel like I don't really know anything about. But I mean, obviously, I think we all utilize their work, right? But to really kind of pinpoint it. But it was, so this organization itself is trying to attract more Indigenous students to their association and to their industry. And they're, trying to figure out, well, how do we do that? And they actually have an Indigenous, or I'm not sure what they call it, an Aboriginal Relations Committee. And so they're, trying to get people together to talk about this issue. And I'm not exactly sure how long they've had that committee and what they've accomplished, but some really good conversations. First of all, the one of the alumni of the University of Manitoba engineering program, I'm sure it has a different name. His name,
Gap.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. I knew that. How did I forget that? Jerry Price, who you may be familiar with. He owns Price Industries. Well, he recently gave, I don't know, 1.5 million or something like that to the University of Manitoba. And $250,000 of that is directly to benefit Indigenous students going through that program, whether it's through scholarship or I'm not sure, but it's a lot of money that will take through their career. And then I believe through his presentation that he did at the last convocation was that any of those Indigenous students that go through that program, he's going to offer them a job. So I'm trying to tell everyone, like, hey, are you interested in engineering? I wonder if I want to be an engineer. Like, it's just such an amazing opportunity. So that's something that people can do to really attract Indigenous to their industry, right? But one of the comments that someone made in the room yesterday was, he's like, okay, we want to help improve the lives of Indigenous people. And we know for ourselves, as the, Western European way, is that we should get that through education. But if we push them to education, isn't that still, really putting a European expectation on them? And I was really pleased to hear that comment, because I thought, okay, they're getting it, right? They're understanding the history, what we're talking about today. And so, I mean, one of my responses is always to be an advocate, right? If there's a way that you can speak to your leadership, your government, that you can advocate for the needs that you are aware of that are happening in the communities, and then bringing people up to an opportunity where they get to make that choice. I'm feeling like I know who I am now. Maybe I want to go to education, and that sort of thing. So there's really interesting conversations in the room. And you must be seeing some of that here and there across Canada?
Yeah, a little bit. I think there's being more and more youth inclusion in our conferences and workshops that go on. Definitely all the events that I attend, I usually ask if there's a particular youth component. But when they do have that, usually there'll be some kind of like a youth table or something. I know Can Do is really big onto that, and they have the annual youth awards for young entrepreneurs and that. But I always try to take the time to actually go and introduce myself to the young people who are kind of up and coming, because I used to be them. I used to be one of the youth rep that all the time, and it was a good experience. But it just really catch up and kind of listen and find out what they're thinking about, because you great insight in.
Oh, he's just disappeared. We'll try. I'll sit and wait for him to get back, but I have to do some edits on this video.
I can see you. Did I lose you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. I guess the rest of BC is starting to wake up because the Wi-Fi is getting slower.
I guess it's that time, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So so I wanted to go back for a second because I was thinking about how, so you said some businesses are hiring a liaison role and then not doing it the right way. It's kind of looking like the Indian agent. So what would you say is a way to prevent that? Like, what is a better way to do that type of role?
Well, usually what I suggest is that they hire Indigenous people with an actual role, not just the role of here you go talk to the Indigenous people so that we don't have to. They do have to be in middle and senior management positions, and they have to be skilled in those areas. So if you're talking something like resource development, for instance. If a large, resource extraction company approaches my First Nation, I don't want to be talking to their Aboriginal relationship manager or liaison or something like that. I want to be talking to their environmental stewardship officer. Definitely the roles and the responsibilities are very important. I'd love to talk to an Indigenous person who has a specific role in the company. And I'd like to see, companies that are able to report how many Indigenous people, they have hired. And I think as a community, we have to look realistically at the numbers. I mean, we are 4% of the population. So any company that's got 4% Indigenous staff is doing its job, right? Is right on par. Companies, such as Stornoway, Diamonds, they have 20% Indigenous staff. So they've hired 5 times the, national population. Now, obviously, they're in a region where the vast majority of the people there are Indigenous. But it is definitely something that's very important, that it reflects the local community. If it's a situation where everybody coming in is from outside and they're non-native, well, that's bad because that's their monies. Every payroll dollar paid is leaving the community, and that doesn't help us. So that's what we like to see, is that the person that we're talking to is a legitimate person in the company. They have a legitimate role. The other thing I sometimes see companies do is they'll hire an Indigenous person who doesn't really know anything, and then they'll just kind of parade them around at like conferences and that, and like, here's Joe, our native guy. He doesn't know anything, but look, we hired him. And I meet a lot of those people, and they're always kind of giving me this look like, I really need this job. Don't tell this guy I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's kind of hilarious, right, that I run into people like that all the time. Yeah. So, and then usually I'll refer them to like, okay, if you want to know about this industry, this is what you need to read, this is what you need to do. And I think for those people who are in those roles, it's very important for them to continue to get more education, to learn more about the industry that they're in, and start looking at what's next. I mean, my father actually gave me some really good advice on that. He was in the RCMP for 37 years. And, I don't think he ever once took a role that was specifically for Indigenous people. And when I asked him about that, he said, well, everybody who took those jobs is still there. Okay, so I mean, if you climb up into a company and as an Indigenous person, you get to the Aboriginal relations job, well, they're always going to need someone at that job, and that may limit your options for continuing to move up in the company. So if you are going to accept one of those roles, you have to be very specific with your employer that, okay, I will plan to do this role for 3 years to 5 years or such, and then I'm hoping this will earn me the option or opportunity to move up in the organization. So it can be a good stepping stone if it's within an organization, within an industry, and it's paired with continuing education.
Right, which some larger companies will pay for, right? If you're a permanent employee, they'll pay for that. So what about for smaller businesses? Smaller businesses who they want to, act on the calls to action, or they want to, show that they want to participate in reconciliation and they want to hire, but they're just struggling. And so, for example, there was a business that in Winnipeg, well, their main office in Winnipeg, and they have a location in Kenora, and no no relationship with Indigenous communities or people really, besides me, which, you know, we know through the Chamber of Commerce. And, you know, but they were having trouble. And I guess for them to hire a liaison person was like, well, we're a small business. We can't really afford an entire new role, you know, for this portion of our strategic plan or goal or whatever. And really struggling to hire someone that definitely has several First Nation communities in the surrounding area. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, you know, as a smaller organization, they're unlikely to need a full-time person. So that's where I would suggest they contract with some type of advisor or consultant, you know, so such as yourself, right? So just ask somebody, because I mean, if it's only going to be needed a few hours a week, that's all a small business really needs. Is that, okay, we need this provided, and but obviously that should be on a contractual basis, and the contract should be very specific about what is to be delivered and what is there. But small organizations can always give back in a lot of different ways. Powwow committees are always looking for sponsors. Minor sports programs are always looking for it. All the arts programs are always looking for sponsorship. And it's not too difficult to say, you know, like, you know, this powwow is sponsored by Ray's Hauling, you know, or whatever it might be, right? So that's always goes a long way, because there is monies coming into First Nations. However, they're not always going to places we want them or need them. A lot of the dollars that come into First Nation, especially through government sources, are very conditional or subject to a lot of reporting. So when it comes to the fun stuff like powwows, treaty days, gatherings, hockey tournaments, and different sports, we rely on small business just like any other municipality does. You go to any municipality's local hockey rink, and all around the boards and all around the rafters, you see advertisements for local businesses, you know, Ray's Hauling, you know, Jones Septic Service, whatever it is, because they put money in to make those programs happen. So I guess any company working with First Nation knows that we have the same needs as municipalities and other levels of government.
Excellent. Excellent. So I wanted to share that, I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post this morning, and I shared it on Facebook also, but it was 6 things that I learned from Frank Busch. And so,
oh no, I didn't see that.
So the first one that I said was Manitoba is the fastest growing Indigenous market. Sorry, I'm stuttering all over the place. And I think that's not something that everybody knows, which is super cool for me to be here in Manitoba, because I get to see it, right? I'm so excited to see things happening. I mean, still lots of challenges, but cool to see that happen. The second one was that First Nation children on reserve can be waiting up to 64 years for a school.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, it's just shocking. It shouldn't be. And then I realized I typed this one, I got to correct it, but First Nation governments with relationships with lenders are often treated as individuals instead of governments, which is where your company comes in that you're working with. Are you frozen?
Yeah, and that's kind of an ongoing battle that I'm kind of fighting. You know, Manitoba for us, for the First Nations Finance Authority, is definitely our fastest growing market. I believe we put $78 million into Manitoba First Nations in the last 3 years, approximately. In the investment community, that is what's called an emerging market. And is a pretty hot commodity for investors. You know, they do see you know, something that's going to grow fast and grow quickly, and to be a huge opportunity economically. So for many years, the Manitoba First Nations have kind of been behind other provinces, especially say Ontario and BC and Nova Scotia. And it's really, you know, due to limitations of the Indian Act, due to colonial attitudes and that, and just the fact that, you know, Manitoba's economy as a whole has grown at a slower rate than other provinces. And First Nations people are definitely not insulated from those, you know, economic effects. So I think it's a huge opportunity for both the First Nations in Manitoba and the citizens and population of Manitoba to encourage those business relationships and growth, and see that outside investment coming in. The $78 million that we have put into First Nations in Manitoba is from outside investment. So this is money that's come from outside of the province, largely from the United States, because we do go to Bay Street and Wall Street to raise monies for First Nations. And most of those monies were used to hire Manitoba contractors and suppliers and other businesses. These are mostly dollars that were spent on major projects and business development in First Nations in Manitoba, and is continuing to grow. So it's really just great for everyone. And what we found, in recent studies, is that every dollar coming into the reserve will often circulate 5 times in the local community and surrounding municipalities. So I already see that 78 million is benefiting the province of Manitoba fivefold just by the number of times monies change hands locally. And we want to continue to do that, into the future, and continue working with First Nations in Manitoba. The great benefit that the Manitoba First Nations have over other jurisdictions, including BC, is their contractual and relationships with the province of Manitoba in terms of the tobacco and fuel tax rebate system. It's likely one of the best or more advanced revenue sharing systems in the country for First Nations. A few other markets are able to replicate that, including British Columbia. So that's a big advantage that the Manitoba First Nations have to catch up, but it's also something that will immensely help the economy of Manitoba as a whole. So that's definitely something I'm going to continue kind of working towards. I'm continually meeting with First Nations in Manitoba. I think I'm probably in and out of Winnipeg or Thompson, at least quarterly, if not more, which, considering there's, 12 or 13 provinces and territories, I actually get back to Manitoba quite often, and we'll continue to do so. But I think it's incumbent upon all Indigenous people in Manitoba to really get out into the labor force as the economic kind of boom starts to bloom. We want to be in on it this time, because for too many years and too many decades we've been left behind economic growth in Manitoba. So I think conditions are pretty ripe in Manitoba. Considering challenges and setbacks for great economic growth to begin happening. There's just a lot of logistical opportunities and advantages that Manitoba has considering its location in the center of North America. And really be a part of that, and I'm looking to see that. And Manitoba has a really diverse economy. I mean, we're kind of like a farming, forested province with the inland ocean. I mean, you just can't beat that. We just go on everything.
Oh no, we lost him again. Not today, internet. That was the second time we lost you.
Oh no, I don't know. Yeah, it must be our wireless signal out here, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think we got most of it, and I want to be respectful of your time. I realize we've been talking for an hour, but again, I wanted to say thank you. I'm so inspired, and I wanted to share I recently have been thinking about the difference between being motivated and being inspired. And being motivated is almost like that. You're at the beginning of the race and you're getting ready to take off and you're energized, and motivation is great. But inspiration and being inspired is really more deeper, and it's really sort of, in the invisible realm of where that motivation comes from. And I really feel that from you. I love the work that you're doing. And I think that because you've had such a wide variety of experience that, is on your resume, in your bio, contributes to everything that you continue to share and do in all of your work. So thank you so much for your time, and really happy to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was really very good as always. Kinanaskomin.
Miigwech. Have a great day. I'll talk to you really soon.
Sounds good. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.